So today I thought it'd be really fun to go over all of the books that I was required to read in high school. What inspired this video idea is that I am in my childhood bedroom and I was going through some of my things and I stumbled upon my book list that I made back when I was in high school. So back when I used to track books, before Goodreads and before I had my book journal, I used to track the books that I read per grade. So my year would be September through August, and now as an adult, it's January through December. But back in the day, I used to do it based off of the school year, and I have every single book that I've read from freshman year of high school all the way through senior year. So I just wanted to go over the required reading that I had to read in each grade in high school. And the reason why I wanted to make this video is because I always just find it really interesting that everyone is required to read different things in different schools. So there's some books that no matter where you live in the country, every single person, it seems like, has read in high school. And then there's other books that some people have read and then my high school didn't require it. Like, I was never required to read a Jane Austen book in high school, which makes me still mad to this day, but I know a lot of other high schools in the country do require Jane Austen. And then obviously not only for people in the United States, but also people that don't live in the US, their required reading is going to be a lot different than probably what I experienced. So as I go along in this video, please keep track of the books that are familiar to you that you did read in high school, and then also the books that you've either never have heard of or were not required to read in high school. I would love to hear, because I'm just always so curious to know what was required and what wasn't. And here to help me is my dog, who I actually got my freshman year of high school. So I thought it would be a little nice surprise to add her into the video today. And I don't want to hurt her eyes with the ring light, so I'm going to put her back. So I'm just going to get into the first book that I read my freshman year of high school. I remember my freshman year of high school, we read like a bunch of different things. I do not remember this being my favorite year of required reading. Actually, my favorite book of all time is actually my sophomore year, so get ready for that. But I guess we'll just start off with the first required book, which was Lord of the Flies by William Golding. Again, I feel like this is a book that is probably more well-read than the other books on this list, but Lord of the Flies is an obvious classic, and it's about a group of schoolboys who get stranded on a deserted island and they have no adult supervision. So they basically have to fend for themselves and have the freedom to do whatever they want. I don't remember loving this book at the time, but I am glad that I read it because I feel like Lord of the Flies is mentioned a lot because it really gets into human psychology and what happens when there really are no rules and no regulations. And I feel like I hear it mentioned a lot just like out there in the world. So even though I don't remember really liking Lord of the Flies, I'm really glad that I read it and glad that it was required reading for me. Okay, this next book, I feel like I don't even need to explain what it's about because this is the one book that probably everyone was required to read, but that is Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare. I have the edition where it has the Old English and the New English side by side, but I always made sure to read both. So this book is obviously about Romeo and Juliet. It's a love story that's doomed because both of their families hate each other. And obviously I'm not going to get more into detail because I'm sure you are familiar with this incredibly famous story, which is also referenced a lot. That's one of the reasons I really love to read classics, because even though they are sometimes really difficult to read and to get into, the amount of references you hear out there in the world and the way it allows you to understand some certain things that happen, just because classics have had such a huge impact on society. So it's just always good to just be familiar with the story. I don't know what I'm gonna have to say about Shakespeare just because it's Shakespeare and I feel like you either love him or you just can't get into him. Obviously, I was like very young when I picked this book up. I was probably 14, and I don't know how well I was really able to appreciate Shakespeare at the time. It would be different probably as an adult. I mean, that could go for probably every single book on this list. I would have a new perspective of the book if I read it as an adult. But yeah, that's Romeo and Juliet, and I am sure that you probably have already read this one. So the next book I'm going to talk about is one of my freshman English teacher's favorite books, which is why we were required to read it, and that is Tuesdays with Morrie by Mitch Albom. This book is a nonfiction story about Mitch Albom, who goes to see his old college professor, Morrie Schwartz, who is on his deathbed, and Morrie Schwartz basically just gives him lessons in ways to live. And this book is basically about Mitch and his professor having a conversation and the insights that he's gleaned. Also, just because Mitch Albom is now a little bit older, and you know, when he first met Morrie Schwartz, he was young and in college, his perspective on life has changed. And anyway, this book is really, really insightful. If you're looking for a nonfiction, this is such a heartwarming and touching book, because I'm sure there's someone in your life, either like a mentor or a family member, that has imparted wisdom on you or have given you like inspiration, and that's exactly what this book is about. And it's just very heartwarming and touching, and just gives you valuable insight on how to live your life in a more fulfilling way. And also a book that I probably would have changed my perspective on if I had read it as an adult. I do believe I've read this book more than once, but I don't think I've ever read it as an adult, and it definitely should probably be on my TBR. So the next book is Of Mice and Men. This book is about George and Lenny, who are laborers in California on a vegetable field. This is set in or during the Great Depression. So Lenny and George are a very unlikely pair. They have very different personalities, but they suddenly land a job, like a dream job on a ranch, and then certain shenanigans ensue, and then they have to face the consequences. So again, I don't remember loving this book. I do remember it being an easy read and like me semi-enjoying it. It's definitely not one of my favorite books from high school. I'd say Tuesdays with Morrie actually would probably be up there with one of my favorites, but obviously John Steinbeck is such a famous and well-known author. He writes a lot about the Great Depression and all the struggles that people and families faced during that time. I will obviously get more into John Steinbeck a little bit later in this video, as I have read more of his work in school, but then also because I was exposed to John Steinbeck in high school, I actually ended up picking a John Steinbeck book up this year, which just shows how much the books that I read in high school really influenced my reading today. So the next book is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. I don't remember liking this book, but I read it, and it's basically about the government destroys books or book burning. I was reading a review for this book, and this person, like the top review on Amazon, it says, according to the book, the people wanted the offensive materials removed. Because everyone is offended by something, then everything is offensive. It must all be destroyed. And I was like, this sounds a little familiar to like what happens today. Like everyone's so offended by everyone's like ideas and opinions. And anyway, I think it'd be interesting to read this book in a new light, as I am a grown-up millennial now. Fahrenheit 451, I don't really remember liking, but I mean, I'm sure there's a reason why it's required in school, but I thought that I would mention it on this list. So the next book that I was required to read was Ordinary People by Judith Guest. I just want to highlight that this book was written by a woman, because I've just been noticing with the books that I've mentioned so far that they're all written by men, and I feel like that's going to be a similar trend later in the video, and I just like want to highlight all of the women or the books written by women, because I feel like, I don't know, maybe my high school like didn't do a good job of like highlighting female authors, or like having us read classics written by females. But anyway, I just wanted to point that out. But Ordinary People is about an ordinary family who goes through or struggles through losses, and I also do think that there is mental health rep in this book. It's set in the 1980s in like a suburb of Chicago, and yeah, I mean, I don't really remember a lot about this book. All I really remember is kind of like I think it just explores the topic of like an ordinary family in a suburb, and from the outside they could look really average and normal, but obviously on the inside there's more that goes into people than what you see, and that's basically what the book is about. But I believe the main character in the book, who is a boy, has mental health struggles, and yeah, that's basically all I remember from the book. So the next book is The Color of Water by James McBride. I honestly wish that I remembered this book more than I do, but I had to research it to remember what it's about. But this is, I believe, a true story from the author, and it's a tribute to his mother. James McBride is biracial, so his mother is Polish Jewish and his father is a black man from North Carolina, and he just talks about his experience being biracial and growing up in a household with a lot of siblings, and also talking about his mother, who is a little bit evasive about her past and her family. And yeah, I wish I remember this book a little bit more, but it sounds like a really good book. This was just so long ago, which is so crazy. Like this was back in 2009. which is like 11 years ago. That's kind of insane. But yeah, so I don't remember this book as well as I wish I did. Just made it through my freshman year book list, and for some reason, now that I think about it, I remember reading certain books that are just not on this list, and I don't know why. But it may be because like I either didn't finish them, or it was like something that we read in class or at school or something. So I believe my freshman year of high school, we read Helen Keller, but like the play version of it. And I just remember like we were like reading the play out loud in class, and like my teacher would call on people to go in the front of the room and play a part. And literally the meanest girl in my grade was in my class, and she was playing Helen Keller, and then I was called on to play the teacher or like the tutor, and it was like such a bad experience, and I just thought of that as I'm doing this video. And then we also, I think I read Ender's Game my freshman year, which is by Orson Scott Card. I remember really disliking this book because it's sci-fi, and I usually really struggle with sci-fi, and I believe it had like kind of a fighting or yeah, like a soldier training element to it, which is like not my thing at all. And I don't know why it's not on this list. If my memory is mistaken me, I swear that I also read that my freshman year of high school. So now we're getting into sophomore year of high school, and pretty excited to talk to you about the books that I read in 10th grade. So the first one is Othello by William Shakespeare. This is, I think, my favorite William Shakespeare play that I've ever read, and this is just about Othello, who's a black lieutenant, and someone is jealous of him and wants to basically see his downfall, so he accuses Othello's wife Desdemona of being in a love affair. And I'm not going to get super into Shakespeare because I feel like these are just very well-known stories, but I do remember really liking this story. So the next book is Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. This book is about a pre-colonial African village, and then the effects of what happens when Europeans come in and try to colonize it, and just the tragedy that happened after that. I actually do remember liking this book when I read it. I was just researching it. I did not realize that it's actually a trilogy. I thought it was a standalone book, but it's been so many years since I've read it. I'd be curious to know like how the story developed after the first novel, but I do remember really liking this book. So the next book is Candide by Voltaire, and this book is a satire written in 1759, and it talks about the 18th century French Enlightenment culture and just kind of calls it out for its excesses. We read this book to study what it means to be a satire, which this was probably my first introduction to satire, and obviously I don't think about this book a lot, but whenever I think about, I'm trying to think of the way it's influenced my life, and just thinking to like when you watch SNL or comedy, or when you hear someone say something in satire, this was my first ever introduction to that type of work. Yeah, so I don't remember a lot about the book, but again, it did change my mindset more than I probably think that it did. We've come to my favorite book of all time, and I'm so excited to share it with you, and it is All Quiet on the Western Front by Erich Maria Remarque. This I read my sophomore year of high school. This is probably the book that I've read over and over the most out of any other book. I've read it so many times, and I'm actually planning on reading it next month. The reason why I don't have a copy of it is because I actually took my home copy over to New York with me, but I love this book so much. This book is about Paul Bäumer, who enlists to join the army in World War I, so he fights for Germany, and it just talks about his life in the trenches and just being a soldier, and a lot about his friends that he is enlisted with and how young and innocent they are. And it talks a lot about hate and war, and just a lot about just men going to war and really not knowing what they're fighting for. And it's just so insightful. I think the writing is absolutely beautiful. I absolutely love Paul Bäumer. He's one of my favorite characters that I've ever read, and this book just means a lot to me. Actually, recently I found out that there is a sequel to this book, even though I actually would consider it more of a companion novel, but it goes over, you know, kind of the aftermath of the war and all of that. I don't want to get into it because I don't want to do spoilers, but if there's one book on this list that I would recommend for you to read, it would be this book. Also, the author, Remarque, he was a soldier in World War I, so he obviously has perspective of what it means to be on the front lines. And honestly, when it comes to war and people that fight, the only opinion, and the only thing that I want to hear is the people that actually faced it face to face with what it actually looks like. And he just gives such a real, like, you actually feel like you're with them, empathize with them so much. But yeah, one of my favorite books of all time, and I'm just really excited to reread it. So the next book is Night by Elie Wiesel. This is an autobiographical account of a man as he is a teenager in the Nazi death camps. And this book was very short actually, but it was, you know, a very hard book to, I think any book when you hear about the concentration camps and just like the things that people experience, it's always really horrific. But I also think it's important to recognize like what actually happened and not shy away from it. And it just shows, you know, the inhumanity that people gave to other people and just saw people as less than human. And this is just a book about World War II that I do remember reading. And then I have also read other books since then, obviously about World War II and people's experience in the camps. The last book that I read my sophomore year of high school was The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. This is one of those books where I would be surprised if you probably have already heard of it or have read it. This is a book that I feel like is required pretty much in most schools in the country. Again, I could be very wrong, but this book is basically about 2 days in the life of 16-year-old Holden Caulfield after he's been expelled from prep school. Holden searches for the truth and rails against the phoniness of the adult world. I would like to research why this book is so popular and so widely known. I think it really just dives into human psychology, and I think that Holden Caulfield is probably a character that a lot of people can relate to, and I think it's also commentary on just like modern society, and some of the experiences that he faced in his life are things that a lot of people have been through. I should probably do additional research on it, but The Catcher in the Rye, I think I have reread since high school. I could be wrong, or at least I remember attempting to reread it, but it's, again, these are all books that I feel like I really have to reread, but yeah, The Catcher in the Rye, one of the most famous books of all time. Now we're going to be getting into my junior year of high school, and the first book is probably one that you have heard of, which is Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Huckleberry Finn is the story of Huckleberry Finn, who is escaping his alcoholic father, and his adventurous journey down the Mississippi River with the runaway slave Jim. Obviously, this book talks a lot about racism, and which is, I think, one of the reasons why I reread it is just to learn about racism in this country. But yeah, I remember actually really liking Huckleberry Finn. I remember I used to go to Starbucks and I would take it with me, and I would like read a chapter and then be writing such detailed notes like in my notebook. And then obviously whenever I would take a test, I'd get like a B, and then the person that didn't read it would get an A. And I like studied this book so hard, but I do remember really liking this book and getting really into the studying process. So the next book is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. This book is set in the 1920s. It's like the Jazz Age and also Prohibition. And I think there are some like love elements to it as well. I know because I read the book, but it's basically about Jay Gatsby, who is mysteriously wealthy, and his love for Daisy Buchanan. Yeah, I feel like people really remember this book highly. God, it just has been so long since I've read any of these books. I feel like I have no insight to actually give you. Sorry, my dog is trying to jump off the bed. Okay. Come here. But yes, I did read The Great Gatsby. The next book is The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, which is a semi-autobiographical book by Tim O'Brien. The main character's name is Tim O'Brien, even though this technically is a work of fiction. And it just talks about a soldier's experience in the Cold War and all of the things that he had to view and experience. I'm assuming we read this book because we were studying the Cold War in school and just learning about what the soldiers had to face. Now you can see what I'm saying about like there's almost no books on this list that are written by women, which is so crazy because I'm already at my 12th grade senior year high school book list, and I think I've mentioned one female author that I was required to read. But anyway, I think there are going to be some coming up, which I will obviously get into. But my senior year of high school, we actually read more untraditional books. So I feel like a lot of the books that I previously have mentioned are books that either a lot of people know or have read. but some of the books that we were required to read were a little bit different and also weren't as old as some of the books that I've mentioned. So the first book is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. This is a post-apocalyptic book about basically, yeah, the world is, I don't remember what happened to the world, but it's like all deserted and there's not many people left on Earth, and it's about a father and a son and their journey through this experience and all of the trials that they have to face, and also about their relationship and love. And this is a really good book. I don't know if it's talked about a lot. I feel like it's a really great sci-fi book, but also like really talks about like the human experience and like what people do when there's like ultimate tragedy. But I do remember really liking this book, and it's not super old. I believe it has come out in the past 20 years. So next I read How to Read Literature Like a Professor, a lively and entertaining guide to reading between the lines by Thomas C. Foster. I feel like I don't really have to get into what this book is about. It's obviously nonfiction, and the title is basically what the book is about. My memories of this book, I'll probably remember these books more than the other ones because these are semi more recent. But I remember bringing this as one of my books for Thanksgiving over to like my grandma's house, and I was like binge reading it. I was like so into it, which is weird because this sounds like the driest topic ever, but I remember really liking this book, and it just talks about how to be more of a active and engaged reader and how to read literature like a professor does. And for some reason I really liked reading it because it's basically you're just reading a book on how to read. So this next book actually was co-wrote by a female author, which is great, and it's called Half the Sky, Turning Oppression into Opportunity for Women Worldwide, and it's by Nicholas Kristof and Cheryl Wudon, and this is basically talking about the human rights violations of women around the world and how women and girls are oppressed in various different countries. I had to read this for a history class actually, and I thought that this book was really insightful and interesting to read. And obviously it's about like all the issues that women have to face in third world developing countries. I thought this was really insightful. It has been obviously years since I've read it, but I'm sure that I've taken some things away, and it has allowed me to gain more insight on what is actually happening in the rest of the world. Next is Life of Pi by Jan Martel. So when Pi's family was immigrating from India to North America, a ship sinks and he's found on a lifeboat with a hyena, an orangutan, zebra, and a tiger. And I don't want to get much more into that because I don't want to spoil the book for you. This is a book that's also widely known and has a movie that we did watch in class. I remember really liking this book because I feel like the language was pretty easy to read. It was written in, or it came out in 2003. So yeah, I do remember liking The Life of Pi. So this book was not on my list, and I 100% read this my senior year of high school. It's Persepolis, The Story of a Childhood, and it's by Marjane Satrapi, and it is a true story, and it's a graphic novel about her experience growing up in Tehran during the Islamic Revolution. And I remember really liking this book. It is a graphic novel, as I said, so it's really engaging to not only hear the story, but also see pictures. And it just talks about her being a young woman in Tehran and the things that she had to experience, and also the things she had to witness as her country was at war. And I remember liking the second part of the book a lot better than the first because it's split into two books. I don't think I added it to my reading list because it's a graphic novel and I must have been a reading snob at the time, but I 100% count this as a book, and it's so interesting and so educational on what was going on in the Middle East at that time. So that was all the required reading that I read in high school. It's actually interesting because I haven't gone through the list like that where I just went through every single book that I was required to read in high school. And obviously I'm very thankful that I did read the books that I did and I was exposed to the literature that I was, because it has influenced the reading that I have today. I feel like there's no way for a school to be able to show you all different types of literature, but it just kind of makes me realize that I feel like I was missing out on a lot. Like, still surprised I never read a Jane Austen novel, or there was not more of a focus on female authors like Virginia Woolf, or there's so many classic women authors that they could have exposed me to. And I feel like also looking at the list, we didn't really get into like hardcore classics. I mean, there was a couple of classics on there like Candide and others, but I feel like some of like the very traditional well-known classics like we didn't read, and I've come to terms with the fact that I have to read them on my own. I've picked up Jane Eyre on my own, Wuthering Heights, and classics are definitely books that I want to get more into, just because I feel like if you're not inspired to read for school, it's really easy to kind of put them off to the side and not pick them up. But I think classics are so important just for not only expanding how I read, but also forcing me to read differently, just because reading a contemporary is a lot different than reading a classic. But it also just opens up your world to so many different cultures and countries and different life experiences, and also just allows you to understand certain references that are mentioned a lot, and also see the influences of these books on modern movies or books today. So yeah, those were all the books that I read in high school. Please let me know down below if you've heard of any of those books, or you've probably heard of any of those books, but let me know if you overlap with me at all, if you read any of those books in high school. I would love to hear from you guys, but don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I will see you guys in my next one.